Arlen Schumer, finally. It is so good to have you on Living on Music. How are you, man?
I'm great. Thank you for having me, Steve. It's
Well,
great to be here. Yes,
that,
finally with you.
thank you. And again, what I love doing, whether it's a musician, whether it's a person from the music world, whether it's any number of people that I've talked to over the last 25 years, let alone with the show, it's been wonderful to look back and look at what you have done in a really, really, I don't know. To me, it is, there are so many topics, but you have this mind-blowing spectrum of things that you've done and your arts and etc. I have three that I love, and we'll talk about everything that you've been involved with as you're going along. But obviously, the comic book art of your life, the wonder of a man named Bruce Springsteen, who we both share a deep affection for, and boy, have you done some wonderful stuff with him, and also the bizarre and brilliant wonder of the Twilight Zone. So we're going to talk about all that. I'm also a 40-year TV guy, and I've worked with some truly incredible designers and artists and creative people like that, and like you. And
I did not know that.
well, and yeah, I was a vice president of marketing in Washington for the last 12 or 14 years of Channel 9 and 5, and a producer, won 3 Emmys, had a fabulous run in DC. Changed into a music focused world as things change, because you have to change, as you know, sometimes you got to bounce around the way you want to bounce around. Anyway, that's me. I learned about that, but let's talk a little bit, Arlen, if we can. The last 3 years have been an incredible time for everybody who's involved in some kind of profession, some kind of study, some kind of world of arts, and anything like that. It was hit. You did some really wonderful things, it seems, even during that time. Right beforehand, you got your master's, right, in graphic design. That is wonderful.
Thanks.
Yeah, I love that. What 2020 hit, was that something that affected you as a human being as well as a creative artist?
Well, I think they're intertwined. When you're an artist, those things are intertwined. For me, the silver lining in the pandemic was that I started doing webinars. For years,
Yes.
decades, I did live lectures about comic book history, Twilight Zone, Bruce Springsteen, pop culture,
Right.
since 1988. My
Yes.
first professional lecture, which was on the Twilight Zone.
Yes.
What happened was, I think in March, right when the pandemic shutdown happened of 2020, a friend of mine who I knew in New York City named Will Friedwald, who's a Frank Sinatra expert, has written books on popular music. He would be a great guy for you to talk to as well.
Neat. Love to.
Will was contacted by a guy named Corey Schneider with New York Adventure Club. They were a company that did live walking tours of New York City and things like that.
Wow.
Well, when the pandemic happened, they had a shift to people. So he said, Corey knew Will, and he said, Will, I need people that are experts in subjects, but it has to also be visual. It can't just be talking like a podcast.
Wow.
Well, Will recommended me. Thank you, Will. I've been doing webinars with New York Adventure Club the last couple of years, as well as doing free Zoom webinars on my own. But for me, doing visuals the way I used to do live lectures,
Right.
and I tried to brand them as visual lectures using the L, the last letter of visual and the first letter of lectures,
Right.
to brand it, because the word lecture is a pejorative, like you're lecturing somebody.
Right.
My live lectures, and many of them are on my YouTube channel
Sure.
from before the pandemic, videos, were very visual because I'm an artist. But in addition to, I love speaking publicly and delivering about the material that I love, that made me become an artist, that
Sure.
I'm in-depth studies of, but I always present them with as dynamic visuals as I can produce using Apple's version of PowerPoint called Keynote.
Sure.
But it's
Sure.
basically, you think of a Ken Burns documentary.
Sure.
That's what my lectures and my webinars are in real time. It's like making a documentary with the audience there, but now in a webinar, they're a virtual audience, but they're still there. And the
Sure.
people watching the video, I mean, my videos of my webinars have thousands of views because most people, they don't see them live. Everybody's busy, but that's okay. I
Right.
record them so that they're all sitting there on my YouTube and my Vimeo channel. With the release of Goldfinger in 1964, Bond Mania kicked off imitations in all other medium, like television with Man from U.N.C.L.E. Of course, in comics, you had things like Spy-Man. Even Archie got in on the trend. Of course, DC handled it goofily. Not like over at Marvel, because you had Jack Kirby creating Nick Fury, Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. But by 1966, he could only do layouts over other illustrators, like this new guy in 66 named Jim Steranko, who by 67 was both writing and drawing his own strip, the first time in Marvel history. And that was, for me, the blessing, the silver lining of the pandemic was that I was able to stay busy by doing a lot of those webinars in addition to this, that, and the other thing.
Yeah, that's exactly that's wonderful, because that is also a common denominator with the musicians that I've talked to, the 200 plus since the beginning of the pandemic, and they also they found their way to go forward, and a lot of it was songwriting. With you, it was creating. In 2023, it's still been a wonderful surge for you of late. Before we go down the history, kind of where your mind has created a lot of this stuff, you did a multimedia retrospective about Bruce. And we'll talk a little bit about why, other than your Jerseyness, how Bruce became a part of you.
It would be a worldwide phenomenon if it was only in New Jersey, but it started there.
Of course. And dozens of my friends who are from New Jersey as well. In fact, my college roommate, Jim Cox, brought Darkness on the Edge of Town back to our freshman dorm room in 1978, and that was the end of it for me. I began an obsession. So talking about you with this, but you were able to you did a couple of Bruce Springsteen things, and you've also got, is the Bruce Springsteen's greatest hits you've never heard something you're continuing to work on?
Well, that's going to be a book.
Yeah.
From Bear Manor Media. They're a great pop culture publisher. And I've been writing what I call liner notes to Bruce Springsteen's voluminous unreleased material.
Great.
For those people and a lot of Bruce fans who don't know this, Bruce is no different than Bob Dylan, Neil Young, the Grateful Dead. He's got volumes of material he's never released, even though he's put out a handful of box sets. He's never written liner notes. He's never really talked about this incredible unreleased material. And most of his greatest live material, he's never put out in any form. And there's about maybe 1,000, maybe more, of hardcore Bruce fans that have always known and circulated these outtakes going back to the mid-70s when they started to emerge. And I was involved. I was art director of Bruce Springsteen's first fan magazine, Thunder Road.
Yes, you were.
Lasted until 1982. And Backstreets, of course, Charles Cross in Seattle, he took over. I started doing articles with Backstreets. Long story short, flash forward to 1998. Bruce is getting inducted in the Hall of Fame. And Backstreets, Chris Phillips, the editor, was running a series of issues of each era of Bruce's career leading up to the Hall of Fame induction. And of course, the release of the box set Tracks, that was also coming out at that same time, the fall of 98. So they said, Arlen, would you write? Because they knew those Bruce fans that I was involved in, they knew that I loved the outtakes. I just always thought, as much as I love his release material, if you know about these outtakes, it's almost as if there's another Bruce Springsteen, like alternate dimension, who is both the same but different. And I even posit in my book, which is a collection of these liner notes that I've been writing for 25 years, on and off since 1998. So they asked me to write a top 10 Darkness outtakes, a top 10 River outtakes, and a top 10 Born in the USA outtakes.
Wow.
That was 1998, 25 years ago. I've been elaborating on those liner notes over the course of the last 25 years with the growth of online Bruce sites, posting my thoughts and my ideas. Long story short, I meet Bear Manor Media, and they go for my book about, I decided, I always thought, what's the use of reading liner notes without the actual music, without these outtakes? And I originally designed Bruce Springsteen's Greatest Hits You've Never Heard. Now I call it Brilliant Disguise. That's the title of the book, because that's what Bruce's unreleased material has been. It's a brilliant disguise. It's sitting there. It exists.
It is.
The average Bruce fan doesn't know about this material.
No.
So the point is that, thank God for the growth of YouTube, that all of these outtakes that started out being circulated on cassette tapes and then eventually being burned on DVDs. This is in the pre-computer era. I'm talking about the 70s, the 80s, the 90s. The bottom line, those outtakes that were on those things, now every one of those outtakes is on YouTube.
Yes.
Now a book that I never thought could be possible in my own artistic mind, what good are liner notes without the music? Now you can actually, and I say this in the introduction to my book, you can now read my liner notes and listen to the music at the same time, which is the multimedia experience I always wanted.
Oh, that's fantastic.
My Bruce project. Look, I just want to show you.
Yeah, you're turning it on. Oh, that's wonderful.
The cover I mocked up. Now, this is the original title, Bruce Springsteen's Greatest Hits You've Never Heard, but now it's the subtitle of Brilliant Disguise. And look at the back cover. That's one of my favorite. People I show this image to, they don't even know that it's Bruce.
That's wonderful.
Eric Viola, the same guy that shot the Born to Run album cover.
Yep.
And I forget who shot this. It might be Miola, but I love the fact that it doesn't look like Bruce.
Yeah,
it is.
That's some neat stuff. I just had Frank Stefanko on Living on Music. Who,
well, there you go.
Yeah, and Eric, he and Eric are like this.
Say Brilliant Disguise.
Yeah, yeah. That's fabulous, and we're going to talk, of course, a little bit more about Bruce, Arlen, for sure. Those are the kind of the things that are churning along right now when you're looking at your life. And I loved looking at how a bunch of the stuff that you began doing at a young age, the art direction and stuff like that. But you're born in Detroit, moved to Jersey, to Fair Lawn. Again, I love Jersey myself and know it well, living in Connecticut. You grew up there. What were some of the childhood musical influences? Like when did Bruce hit yourself? Probably a little later than younger.
Oh,
but what were you also? Again, you had a huge art part of your life that began to just blossom early, and you had the comic book art part of your life. Where did those things kind of blend and kick off for you when you were younger?
So my mother was a widow. My father died when I was 4 months old. She raised my older brother, Steve, and I, a year and a half older, by herself. And I think when I look back on my life that I found my father figures in pop culture. Wow. Started with superheroes. The first comic book I saw in summer camp, which our mother sent us to at a very early age, 2 months of sleepaway camp when I was 5 years old. Very young to do that.
Right.
In order that we would find father figures in the counselors. Well, I found my father figures in camp, but it was the comic books.
Oh, that's great.
And Batman. And then, of course, on television, there was a character, Diver Dan. He was a deep sea diver that they filmed to look like he was moving underwater. But they never showed his face. So he was like a superhero. And my brother started drawing him, so I started drawing him. I was like 3 years old.
Wow.
I grew up with the pop culture of the early 60s. The superheroes led to, listen, Rod Serling was a father figure because the very first visual image I can recall ever seeing, I must have been 4.5 years old, was that Twilight Zone eyeball in outer space.
Right.
Okay. That's the first image I can recall in my life, Steve.
Oh,
I ended up doing a coffee table art book about the Twilight Zone.
well, of course you did, and it's and Arlen, amazing in
I just,
itself.
I just want to show you. There's the cover, but when you take the dust jacket off, that's the eyeball.
Oh,
So I
that's
ended up doing a coffee table art book about the Twilight Zone, but that's my first image. But Serling was a father figure. And then the comic book artists were father figures. I ended up working for Neil Adams, one of the gods of comic book art. He
yeah,
passed away last year, the greatest living Batman artist for 50 years. There would be no Dark Knight without Neil Adams.
right.
But though he was, even though he was 17 years older, old enough to be, he could have been a father figure. And then, of course, Bruce comes along as, even though he's only 9 years older than me,
Oh,
he was kind of like a father figure in many ways, a mentor, an artistic mentor.
right.
But as music, I mean, I grew up with the Four Seasons. The first song I remember, I'm in summer camp. Again, I'm 5 years old and I hear Big Girls Don't Cry, which I thought were the lyrics, Big Girls, Small Fry. You know,
Oh,
boy, the girls are taller. But AM radio in the 60s, the Beatles, I remember seeing the Beatles on Ed Sullivan.
yeah,
The potpourri of AM radio. I grew up on AM radio in the 60s.
yeah. Me
Album
too.
era I came to very late, and that's a whole nother story.
Yeah.
But for me,
Well,
what happened, well,
what
yeah,
was it? Was it AM radio and WABC in New York?
course, of
Yeah.
course. And I used to play saxophone in elementary school, and I used to figure out the sax parts to the songs I was listening to.
Right.
Had I stuck with the saxophone, I might have been like, who is it? David Sanborn?
Yeah, exactly.
Had I stuck with the sax, but I gave it up. But that's another story.
Right.
But yeah, but the sounds of AM radio, everything from Motown to the British invasion songs to like I said, I loved a great pop song. The Happenings, one hit wonders, Susan by the Buckinghams, the same stuff that Bruce, in a sense, ended up feeding back to us.
Well, right.
Yeah.
Right. And that's your, and so that was your musical internment.
And then here's what happened. In the spring of 73, I'm 15 years old. I buy my first stereo after only subsisting on AM radio. So the early 70s album era, Led Zeppelin, Deep Purple, all that stuff, yes, that passed me by. I missed out on the heyday of FM radio in the late 60s, early 70s, because I just didn't have, I only had AM radio.
Right.
But finally, I get a stereo, and here's the thing. It was Elton John, Crocodile Rock in late 72, early 73, that finally made me go buy a stereo.
Nice.
My brother, I'm 15 years old, and the first albums I bought were Don't Shoot Me, I'm Only the Piano Player, which had Crocodile Rock on it, and the Four Seasons Greatest Hits. So that shows you. But here's the thing. Bruce's first album came out in January 73. But you know why I didn't hear it? Because the New York FM stations did not play Bruce's first two albums because they were pissed off by Mike Appel's zealotry. I mean, he thought Bruce was the Jesus Christ of rock and roll, and I'm not kidding. Those are his words.
Oh, yeah.
And he ended up being the savior of rock and roll. That's a whole other story.
Right.
But I became an Elton John fan, starting with Crocodile Rock, because we didn't have Bruce. I'd never heard of Bruce Springsteen until way later.
Right.
But I will always blame the New York disc jockeys for depriving not just me, but any New York, New Jersey, Connecticut area fan.
Yep.
They are lying if they tell you they knew about Bruce from his first two albums, because they weren't played on the radio, period.
No, they weren't at all.
And not to knock Elton John, because I was such an Elton John fan. Goodbye Yellow Brick Road,
my first album I bought.
Yeah. So, and again, all that stuff was great, but the day that I heard the song Born to Run for the first time, which is the first song New York radio played of Bruce's, I and a whole generation were turned on to Bruce. When I heard that song, I just got my license. I'm driving. It's the summer of 75. I just turned 17 and I'm driving in New Jersey near
Right.
Fairlawn. And I'm on my mother's 74 Duster and the AM radio. And I hear this song that so overwhelmed me, Steve,
Yep.
that when it was over, I had to pull over to the side of the road and collect my thoughts.
Right.
Because it sounded like a little bit of everything I loved about rock and roll. You know, when John Landau gave his famous review,
Yep.
the whole line is, but tonight I saw my rock and roll past flash before my eyes. And I also saw something else. I saw rock and roll future.
Right.
And his name is Bruce Springsteen. What he was describing was, and this is what is part of what makes Bruce Bruce. He's a human jukebox of 20th century music, really.
Yeah.
And he's able, so when you hear Bruce, when you go to a concert, you are literally getting a syllabi of American popular music from the mid 20th century on.
Totally.
Through his own music.
Right.
And when I heard Born to Run, from the opening drums to the bells that sounded like the old Phil Spector Wall of Sound songs. And then, remember, I used to play the sax as a kid. I never heard a sax solo like the sax solo by Clarence Clemens in Born to Run. And the guitar, which sounded like the James Bond guitar.
Totally.
That blew my mind. And I'm driving while I'm hearing this, but here's what totally blew me away above everything. A singer who sounded like, now remember, I loved Elton John. Elton John's one of the great voices, but I knew Elton John didn't write the lyrics, that Bernie Taupin, his partner, did.
Right.
I had never heard a singer sing with such commitment in his voice, like he was on the edge of forever. Everything you try to describe about what makes Bruce a great singer.
Right.
But to me, it was the commitment, the passion in his voice. He sounded like he really effing meant it.
Yeah, he did.
Like I had never heard anybody before. You know, there's a version of Born to Run with the isolated a cappella vocal.
Yep.
If you've never heard it, Steve.
I've heard it.
You know what I'm talking about. You just listen to the vocal alone and it'll bring you to tears.
Yeah.
At how on the edge of his emotions he's singing. Yeah. And it's a vocal for the ages, just like the music is for the ages.
It is.
Sprung from cages on Highway 9, chrome wheel, fuel injected and stepping out over the line. Oh, baby, this town rips the bones from your back. It's a death trap. It's a suicide rap. We gotta get out while we're young. 'Cause tramps like us, baby, we were born to run.
It felt like a theme song for rock and roll itself.
Yeah,
and
it did.
I went from being a total Elton John fan overnight to wanting to devour everything about Bruce Springsteen.
Yeah, I agree.
Unfortunately, I didn't get to see him until 1978.
Right.
I missed out seeing him when I was up in Providence and during the Chicken Scratch tour. God, had I seen that in 1977, I don't know what would have happened with my life then.
Yeah, me too.
Until 78.
Yeah.
But I more than made up for it since then.
Yeah, I saw him first in 79 at the No Nukes at Madison Square Garden.
The first night or the second night?
It was the second night, and we were.
I was at the first night.
We were in the last row on the top of the garden, and he still blew our minds open. Nice. And then I saw him in 1980, third row in front of Clarence for the River, and it was the greatest show I've ever seen out of thousands.
Where?
Hartford, Connecticut.
Okay, I saw the River tour first at the Garden when he came at the end of November, October,
right?
Like that.
Yeah.
Well,
and that,
we were both at the No Nuke shows. I was there first night. You were there second night.
Yeah.
You were there the night that he brought Lynn Goldsmith up on stage and threw the cake into the fans' faces, right?
Yes.
Did Were you there for that? Did you notice that?
Yeah. Yeah. It was
You
an
know,
amazing,
Bruce,
it was an amazing experience just to be able to
but
kind of
even
get
for
them in our
being all
heads.
the way back where you were,
Yeah.
you know, I
Yeah.
also, my friend and I, we scalped seats that night, I think $25 and got in. And I started in the rafters and then got my way down. But what was amazing about that show was that even though there were all these opening acts from LA,
Hmm.
the whole audience was there to see Bruce.
Yeah, of course.
And when Shaka Khan came on, I don't know if this happened your night, but when she came on with all of the glitz and everything that she dressed herself up with, the Bruce audience just, they didn't boo her. We were just bruising her because at least the LA guys in their own, way with their blue jeans and laid back look, at least they were being fairly real.
Right.
Remember, Bruce is the ultimate real. Everybody else is half faking it.
Yep.
But Bruce becomes the barometer. And when Chaka Khan came out, she was Bruce
Right.
practically off the stage.
Yes.
But yeah, everybody was there to see Bruce. And I saw him the night he debuted the song The River.
Yep. It was an incredible experience to see him live and then go forward.
Show. Wow.
So you take your Bruce love that's building. Also, just in a nutshell, where did the art begin?
Well, so I said I was drawing Diver Dad.
That's right. You were.
I became the class artist, like everybody who goes to art school is their high school class artist. But I always knew I was going to be an artist. And when I was in high school and I was thinking about colleges, do I want to go to a university with a good art department, or do I want to go to an art school? I had never heard of Rhode Island School of Design until this brand new artist,
RISD,
on the scene named Walt Simonson, who is still doing great work 50 years later, literally. But Walt Simonson had a revolutionary new superhero drawing style. And I was already like a budding comic artist. I suppose in high school, maybe I had fantasies of maybe I'll be a comic book artist. I don't know.
Right.
But it was revealed when Simonson first appeared in the fall of '73. I was a sophomore in high school, that he was from Rhode Island School of Design.
Yeah, RISD. I love RISD.
Yeah. And I was like, if they could turn out a guy like Simonson, that's where I want to go. Ironically, though, when I got to RISD, freshman year, I found out about their graphic design department as opposed to the illustration department, which, when you broke it down, graphic design is words and pictures. Well, comics are words and pictures.
Right.
But I like the idea that graphic design, and RISD had a reputation of being the best graphic design department in the country. So I was like, wow, graphic design, it sounds like it appeals to me, the words and pictures. So I ended up majoring in graphic design. The irony is that I ended up making my living more as an illustrator.
Right.
Use my graphic design knowledge in every single line that I make.
Sure.
And that's the great training of graphic design. I think every visual artist should study graphic design, because our entire world is words and pictures. The computer, everything is words and pictures.
Totally
and that's
is.
what graphic design is. So whether you're a painter or a textile artist or a sculptor, I don't care what it is. If you learn graphic design, you will be a better artist at your own individual artistic bent,
Sure.
whatever that is. So
Sure.
I had a great time at RISD. And of course, then the irony was that I got out of art school, and within a couple of years, I ended up working for the god of comic book art, Neil Adams, which, if you had told me when I was 12 years old in 1970, when Neil was like, Eric Clapton is God, well, that's how Neil Adams, and also Jim Steranko, he was another big name. They were the twin gods of comic book art, like the Beatles and the Rolling Stones. That's what Neil Adams and Jim Steranko were. When I was at RISD, I wrote a fanboy letter to Steranko. He invited me to Reading and wanted me to leave RISD and become his apprentice.
Oh, nice. Jeez.
So, Steve, what do you think I did? Did I stay at RISD and get my degree, or did I join the circus?
You got your degree.
My mother, may she rest in peace, she was paying for college. I was on a partial scholarship. Maybe if it was freshman year, I might have. the chance to be Jim Steranko. Are you kidding me?
Right.
Along with Neil Adams, Steranko. So I turned Jim down. I stayed in school, but we've remained close ever since. And
Right.
then, of course, the coincidence is that 3 years later, I end up working for Neil Adams after I get out of art school in his New York studio, which again, if you had told me when I was 12 years old that Arlen, one day you will be working for Neil Adams, he will be inking your pencil drawings, and he will ink them to keep it in his style. I would have had an adolescent heart attack, Steve, right?
And that was that with his Continuity Associates?
Yes,
Continuity
Associates.
Because prior to that, you really did some amazing stuff, and that's where we were talking about earlier. Is that you worked for NBC Television, doing some Letterman stuff, the NET, doing the. I love that. So you joined you joined television entities.
Neil Adams, those couple of years, I did TV graphics for WNET. I ended up working at NBC.
Yeah, and you worked for Dancer Fitzgerald Sample.
At ABC.
Well, they're They're legendary. I love the fact that they came up with the McGruff.
They were in the Chrysler building. I got to work in the Chrysler building.
Yeah, they come up with McGruff the Crime Dog and Where's the Beef, and that they're a legendary. And you were like in your mid-20s and also working
early
for Neil.
20s. Yeah,
working for Neil Adams.
And once I started working for Neil Adams, I knew that whenever I would be done with him, I would be ready to be on my own, because once you work for your childhood idol, Steve, you can't work for anybody else. And ironically, other than a few day jobs I've had since then, I've really been on my own ever since.
Because you began, Arlen, right around that time with Neil. You began a freelance life in a lot of ways, right?
I began to what? I'm sorry.
You began your freelance illustrator life.
Yeah, I mean, working for Neil was like full-time freelance,
right?
It was like going to graduate school and getting paid for it.
There you go.
Sweatshop hours. You're in your early 20s. I'm living in a tenement apartment in the East Village and working 12-hour days. You know what I mean? Neil was sweatshop hours, but my drawing improved 400% because he would teach by correction, by criticizing when you drew poorly. And that's how you learn. If he didn't say a word, it meant you did well. You know, he was like a Zen master, wax on, wax off, it was like that. But those 2 years that I worked for him, I remember them like they were yesterday, the experiences. But, I would say for the first, I remember a couple months, I had a tingling sensation just standing next to him, because that's the kind of presence, if you knew his comic book background, which I did. So, but of course, then he just became the boss of the art studio. But the bottom line is, it was like I said, it was like going to graduate school and getting paid for it.
Wow, spectacular.
And the foundation I learned from him, the standards that he gave me, when your standards are this high, and then you leave him and you go on your own, when you start dealing with other people, and this is both a blessing and a curse, Steve.
Right.
Most people don't have standards that high. But when you've been trained in those high standards, it's hard to work with other people who are not working up to it. So I was a square peg in a round hole. It's always been hard to fit me in to a 9-to-5 button-down world, man.
Yeah. I could tell that when I was looking through your career life and what
but I've had
projects.
A few full-time jobs, and
you had a few, but it was a while again until I think you took a full-time job after that. You did your first lecture at 30 years old on the Twilight Zone for the School of Visual Arts Symposium, and briefly, I'll tell you just again, as a massive Twilight Zone fan, that's why I love when I was learning more about you and your posts about the episodes. You just posted the other one about the aliens who come in. What's the title of it? You just Deserve Man. And so, but I'll tell you, cookbook. Yeah, you'll love this. And for the last, it must be 10 to 15 years. New Year's Eve, I used to party. We used to go out all the time as a youngster, and then into your 30s and 40s and 50s. Now it's Twilight Zone marathon every New Year's Eve. So
even though they're chopped up with commercials, it's always fun. It's like the James Bond movies with Sean Connery.
Well-
Even though I have them all on Blu-ray, when they come on BBC, I always watch them, even though I've seen them 1,000 times.
Right.
It's just fun having them being broadcast in real time.
Well, a lot of people can be just fans, Arlen, but boy, did you take it to the next level. Lecturing itself at 30 years old. How did that feel? You felt, you must have, because you do it endlessly now, and also your webinars and things like that. You talk very, very well to people. Why did you jump into it?
I think because I'm a frustrated actor. I think had I, because I was most people have identity crises later in life. I didn't have that because I knew since I was 3 years old I was going to be an artist. I'm having a crisis about being an artist now, late in life. But my point is, I rested on my laurels to a degree. I could have been a great actor had I gone into acting. When I was a junior or senior in high school, they did Bye Bye Birdie.
Nice.
I should have been Birdie with my rock and roll background, but instead I did the poster, but I didn't act.
Oh,
I think had I gone into acting, I think I would have been a great actor because that's my personality.
my mother went to Yale, and she went to the Yale School of Drama and was an actress my entire life. So anybody who talks about acting is okay with me.
But my point is, I stayed in art because that was always what I was good at.
Yeah.
I look back at it now, my love of lecturing or doing webinars, it's a form of teaching. And I've never officially taught. I've taught through my lectures because that's me being able to, in a sense, perform by talking directly to an audience, whether they're live or whether they're virtual. It's the same. And that's what I learned from Bruce Springsteen. It's what I call the Bruce Springsteen theory of performance.
I love that.
When I mentioned those outtakes, those old cassette tapes, there are performances where you can hear the sound of 10 people clapping when the song's over.
Right.
The song is this unbelievable performance of Spanish Harlem in 1974 in Schenectady or something like that. But Bruce would do that same incredible performance 5 years later, 4 years later, 3 years later for 10,000 people.
Yeah.
And what you get from that as a performer or as any kind of creative artist person is that commitment to doing your art. So I love the material that I love, whether it's Bruce Springsteen, comic book art, or Twilight Zone. Those are my three main interests.
Yes, they are.
I love relating that material through my own graphic design and storytelling sense and present it both visually and verbally in a way, and that's where the graphic design background comes in.
Sure.
In a way that communicates my love of the material. The teachers you remember, Steve, when you're young, remember them because it doesn't matter whether it was algebra or geometry or English or social studies. If they loved what they were teaching, they communicated that love to you, the student. And that's why, I love that teacher. And those are the teachers you remember. They communicated the love of their subject matter.
Totally.
When I said the word lecture has a negative pejorative sense, it's because most people are bad public speakers. They get up in front of an audience, they drone, they keep one image on screen for 10 minutes. I show 300 images in 1 hour.
It's great.
Because I keep them going like a performance. And my emotion and passion have been inspired by Bruce. I already was emotional and passionate.
Yes.
But Bruce became, and remember, I was looking up to Neil Adams was as hard of a worker as Bruce Springsteen, and visually was as much of a genius as Bruce Springsteen is musically. And as Rod Serling was a great writer, as all of my icons and the people were all great at what they did. And Bruce became the musical focus of the ultimate in performing rock and roll, period.
Well,
writing songs, making albums, or doing it live. He became the greatest at all of that.
Yes.
And
He's
that became, I think, every creative person that's been inspired by Bruce Springsteen, I guarantee you, will say the same things.
Oh, I agree 110%.
Exactly.
I
And
became
how and if you're a thinking, feeling person, how could you not be affected by that?
yes.
That's what Bruce's magic is partly all about, is that he lives it.
Yeah.
He is it.
Yeah, his motivation to us and not only other musicians that are going to be famous or well known. I've been a singer for 17 years in cover bands. I started when I was 46. And
Wow.
guess what I'm singing, Arlen? You'll be thrilled, and I'll send you the clip of it if it sounds half decent. For the first time in 17 years, singing Jungle Land
Oh my
at a gig in 2 weeks, and I'm just we've got a
Wow.
whole full band of horns, and so I wanted to tell you that because
Wow.
you'll love that. But hit that motivation of me singing even cover band stuff for 17 years
Doesn't matter what it is.
has been Bruce, and we do a number of stuff in our acoustic duos with him. You wrote a book. Or you put together a book, edited, designed, Visions from the Twilight Zone, about 3 years after you did the first lecture. How did you do that? And you were able to take that brand on and do it. And how did that all come together?
Well, like I said before, in the late 70s, video art started to come in to vogue when I was in art school.
Right.
Artists were taking pictures of distorted TV images and presenting them as prints, as framed art.
Right.
And I remember looking at that going, I bet you if I took pictures of Twilight Zone episodes and treated them as black and white art photography, which also in the late 70s was just coming into vogue. The Born to Run album cover is a major impetus of that, by the way. That was the black and white graphic look right before punk hit. And punk, because it was partly ska and reggae, comes out in the early 60s when black and white graphics were popular.
Sure.
But Bruce, by doing that Eric Miola album cover, that really was a black and white artistic photograph statement. If you think of Patti Smith's first album, Horses, it would not be possible without that Bruce album cover. So that black and white graphic look.
Yeah.
And then I always felt Twilight Zone was the ultimate black and white TV show because there was something about the look. When you flipped around the dial, you knew when you landed on a Twilight Zone episode. It was hard to define why. And my pursuit of that why ended up leading me to doing a coffee table art book about the Twilight Zone.
Wow.
Through a Twilight Zone-y circuitous route that I never would have imagined.
Oh, I love that. I want to see. I don't think I've seen that, and I'm surprised because I am a coffee table head, and I'd love to get a glimpse of that book. And you got to tell me where I can get mine because
I'll send you all that.
Oh my God! Because there is something so infinitely special. What are my three favorite episodes of the Twilight Zone? It's The Served Man is one of them. It's the other one with the only Twilight Zone with no dialogue whatsoever, with the bewitched mother in the house by herself with the supposed aliens.
There's very little dialogue at the very end.
Very little. Yeah, like radio, United States. We're here.
Is dead.
Right.
By the way, that's the voice of the director, Douglas Hayes, on the giant race of humans.
Oh, that's great. I love that. And we could go on about those, but that's wonderful. Your other passion, my friend, in your life, and you have the logo right behind you. I see him right over here at the corner. Batman, who is my hero from the television show, obviously with Adam West. And I know. I grew up with it. And so what do you want?
If you were a fan of the comics before the TV show, you didn't like the Batman TV show because it was campy. We wanted Batman to be treated like Sean Connery's Bond.
Well, you know who I grew up with in Wilton, Connecticut? Bob Kane was from Wilton. His son, the original artist, though. You didn't like his original art?
Well, yes and no, because Kane, right from the start, was being ghosted by Jerry Robinson. I mean, yes, there's early Kane drawings, of course, but, I've done a whole series of lectures and webinars on Bill Finger, his partner, writer, who contributed more to the Batman look and legend than Bob Kane did with his drawings.
Very interesting.
Bob Kane screwed Bill Finger out of credit He died penniless. He died unknown, unmourned, and unloved.
Where did your love of these guys come into your life, the superheroes? Because I know there's Batman is touched on, Superman's touched on. Why that too, as part of the Springsteen and art life?
Wow. Okay. So, the comics, like I said, I learned how to read from comics.
Yeah.
Superman, then Batman, the DC comic superheroes. My brother was more of a Marvel fan. But yeah, the TV show, of course, we loved it and hated it. But yeah, I grew up a comic book superhero guy, and drawing superheroes. And that just became, and over time, as you got older, there wasn't a lot of comic book history books or anything like that. But whatever there was, if you love an art form, you sort of become interested in the history of that art form. Guys like Keith Richards and Bruce Springsteen, they know the source of every guitar lick they're playing,
right,
from the original Black bluesmen who played those licks.
Sure.
Steven Spielberg is an historian of film,
right,
as much as he is a practitioner. All the greats are historians by de facto default. You know what I mean?
Sure.
And I became an armchair comic historian just because I love comics, I love the history, and I love learning about the history. And again, there was very little, but what there was ended up inspiring me to eventually do my own book, which I will lift right here, of course.
Please do.
The Silver Age of Comic Book Art, which is the best book about comic book art history ever. Why can I say that? Because I have every book about comic book history. They were all text heavy with little reproductions.
Wow.
I became an artist because of these comic books. And I'm like, where is the book about comic book art? Well, you know what they say, Steve, if you want something done right, you got to do it yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it only took about 25 years, but I ended up putting out the only real art book about comic book history because I reversed the proportions of text to image. So like on this spread about Kirby's Captain America,
wow,
I take 3 different fight scenes from 3 different comics. I take out the original word balloons, and I have Kirby from an old interview saying how he choreographed fight scenes like violent ballets.
wow,
so you read my book
great.
like a giant comic book, but it's an art book and a history book at the same time.
Wow.
And when I say there's no other book like it, like I said, I have every book.
Yeah.
And my book is the only book about the Silver Age, the 1960s, the height of Marvel and Jack Kirby, the height of Neil Adams and Jim Steranko.
Sure.
Every movie they're making, every TV show of the last 20 years has come out of the 1960s. And they're still mining it for concepts. In the same way Twilight Zone came out of the 60s and has been mined ever since for movies and TV show concepts,
right,
to the point where the Twilight Zone's influence, he's like the shadow. He's so pervasive that he's invisible. Twilight Zone, I call it 6 Degrees of Rod Serling, based on 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon.
You bet.
I can connect any modern science fiction, fantasy, or horror concept back to Twilight Zone episodes in less than 6 degrees.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
Can we see that done somewhere? And
okay, so I mentioned Bear Manor Media is publishing my Bruce Springsteen book. They're also publishing Embarrassment of Riches and My Cup Runneth Over, my book of Twilight Zone episode essays that I call the 5 themes of the Twilight Zone. In the same way I've been writing those Springsteen liner notes for 25 years, I've been writing these episode notes that have turned into essays for the last 30 years since my book came out.
Oh, that's spectacular.
Now it's going to be more, both of these books are going to be more text heavy than my usual coffee table picture books because the publisher is that kind of a publisher. But that's okay because it's all about my writing. Even though I've always been a visual artist, I've been published enough. I can call myself a writer, Steve. But I think when both of these books, they'll be coming out sometime in 2024. It's me as purely as a writer, which is okay. because I'm finally going to have that kind of proof of my writing. I'm very proud of my writing. And, they say, write what you love, write what you know. Well, I think when you read these essays or the Bruce liner notes, which are like miniature essays,
right.
I think my love for my subject matter, like everything I do, I think it comes out in my writing. The compliments I've gotten, because I've been posting the Twilight Zone essays as they appear on reruns each night, kind of like I'm serializing the book before it gets collected. But the responses I've gotten on Facebook, especially from people, are like, "Wow, Arlen, your love for these episodes really comes through." And when I read these essays, I really feel like I'm revisiting the episode. And so it's really a gratifying thing that Bear Manor Media is going to publish both books sometime in 2024.
Oh, that's fabulous. I can't
Yeah.
wait. I can't wait to check those out because it could be an endless ride. And I hand it on to my kids to say,
Well,
you don't forget Twilight Zone, because my daughter has worn it. She's 21. She loves coming to New Year's Eve and watching Twilight Zone, and I love that she got it.
So here's the thing. I categorize, I call it the 5 themes, because ever since 30 years ago, I was given the opportunity by the Chicago Museum of Broadcasting to do my Twilight Zone multimedia lecture, and they gave me 5 days to program my favorite episodes. So it forced me to come up with, I'll come up with 5 themes of the Twilight Zone. I didn't know what they were. I just said, I'll come up with them, and I'll organize my favorite episodes under each theme. Well, here we are 30 plus years later, and it's finally going to be published as a book. So the themes I came up with 30 years ago are the ones I'm still using. One is called A Question of Identity.
Right.
All the episodes in which characters question, who am I? What am I?
Right.
Another one is called Suburban Nightmares.
Right.
Because so many of the Twilight Zone episodes, the one that aired last night, Little Girl Lost, about the child disappearing under her bed. Everybody has lived that. Science and Superstition, which is not only all the science fiction episodes, but also the superstitious episodes, dealing with, reality versus fantasy, dreams versus reality.
Right.
Black and white, these extremes. So Science and Superstition covers so many great episodes. And then there's the time element, as timeless as infinity. All the episodes of people going back in time, forward in time, time itself. So many great episodes. And then the last one is Obsolete Man. There's an episode called The Obsolete Man, but Serling's, one of his overriding themes was the individual versus the state.
Right.
The individual being threatened by consumerism, by technology, themes that we're still dealing with, of course, in the 21st century more than ever.
Totally. Absolutely.
So what I did was, now you got to remember, I'm very critical about the Twilight Zone. There's 156 episodes. I think half of them are dogs.
Right.
Then you're left with 75 episodes. I think 50 of them are what I call good to great television. And then there's 25 episodes that I would give to the aliens.
Right.
If they room on their spaceship for one Earth TV show.
Right.
Give them these 25 episodes. Now, my 25 is going to be different from another Twilight Zone fan's 25, or your To Serve Man is not even in my top 25.
Oh, well.
But that's what makes a horse race, right? But here's the thing. I ended up with 66 essays about 66 episodes that fall into these 5 categories that I believe I'm trying to create a consensus. Every art historian in every medium or genre, part of what they do all day is they come up with consensus. Who are the greatest living artists? Who is a great writer? Who is not a great writer? This is what art historians and critics do.
Right.
Nobody's done that really for the Twilight Zone. They've written about the Twilight Zone, but nobody's basically said, these are the best episodes.
Right.
And by omission, I'm telling you that the episodes that are not in the book, 90 episodes, are not in the book, but 66 are. Well, I believe when you've read through those 66 essays, you will have everything you need to know about what made The Twilight Zone the greatest TV show of all time and why those are the episodes I'm giving to the aliens. They don't have room for all 156. I'm giving them these 66 episodes, and by writing about them the way I've written about them, I'm making my statement for posterity that future Twilight Zone aficionados and historians, they're going to have to reckon with my basically opinions
Right.
in these episodes. And in the end, you'll judge my writing and say, wow, Arlen, the way you wrote about these episodes justifies why they're in the book.
Yeah, that's absolutely would make sense. What do you think of the Twilight Zones that are being made now?
Horrible. Every remake, starting with the Spielberg movie, first of all, they all shoot them in color. You know, the Twilight Zone, the middle ground between light and shadow, that's a black and white concept. The difference between reality and fantasy, between dream and nightmare, what the show was about at its metaphysical best was a black and white concept.
Totally.
To shoot in color misses the point right from the get-go. But the bottom line is the stories they've told, the way they've told them, the ones they've remade, I'm sorry, but they all suck.
Yeah, I was expecting that.
I've watched them all, even the episodes, by the way, when guys, Arlen, you have to see, there was an episode of the 85 series, something about Paladin of the Lost Hour or something.
Right.
Arlen, this is the great, yeah, I watched it. Guess what? It sucked. You know, it started with Night Gallery. I watched all the Night Galleries when they were first on. I thought they sucked.
Me too.
With the exception of maybe one handful, less than one handful.
Yeah.
Most of them are in the very first TV movie, the episode Richard Kiley in the concentration camp. But my point is, fans of Night Gallery now, you know, there's an art book about Night Gallery and a podcast, whatever. They're like, Arlen, you have to see they're tearing down Tim Riley's bar, and you have to see the Messiah of Mott Street. And I remember watching those when they came on in 1972 or whatever. I didn't think much of them then. But finally, I watched them on DVD because, Arlen, you can only see Night Gallery on the DVD. But they look as tawdry and as bland as I remember them in the early 70s. And I hate to break the news to you, but Tim Riley and Messiah both sucked.
Oh, too bad.
In my humble opinion, what can I tell you?
No, that's fine.
My point is, none of the remake, the recent Jordan Peele 2-season thing, did you watch those?
No.
Well, watch them and let me know what you think. I thought they sucked. The only true Twilight Zone homage that's done it right. Have you seen Black Mirror from the BBC?
Yes. Some of Black Mirror. Yep.
Not every episode is great, but there are a number of episodes that, because it's the vision of one guy, this Charlie Booker,
right?
That's his name. What the new Twilight Zones have always lacked was that Serling vision. You need, they should have put David Lynch in charge of a Twilight Zone remake.
Right.
You need a guy with George Bush used to say the vision thing. You need a guy with the vision thing. Now, we thought Jordan Peele, based on Get Out, was that man. Well, how disappointing was he? Out of the 20 episodes, he only wrote and directed one. He basically farmed it out. They gave him the legacy of Serling, and he didn't even write and direct any of the first season episodes.
Right, exactly.
How pathetic was that? And by the way, they sucked. And by the way, they all suck because they don't stick to the half-hour format. The Twilight Zone 1 hour episodes, there were 18 of them. I think 2 of them were worthy of the 1 hour, the ones I write about. Death Ship, and On Thursday We Leave for Home. The rest are padded. The Outer Limits. People think The Outer Limits is better than The Twilight Zone. Are you kidding me?
No, not close. Every
episode of The Outer Limits is padded to fit the hour. Steve, I wish I could take every hour-long Outer Limits, every hour-long Twilight Zone, every hour-long Alfred Hitchcock, give it to a professional TV editor and say, edit these down to a half hour. I guarantee you they would all be more watchable than they are right now.
Yeah, absolutely. One of my other favorite Twilight Zones is that one with the masks.
The Mask. I
Yeah,
call that Serling's last great Twilight Zone. I think he wrote 6 more after that
Oh.
aired in the spring of '64.
right.
But The Masks is his last great episode. And again, it's because of the visual. Those masks by William Tuttle, the same guy that did The Eye of the Beholder,
Wild.
which is considered, I consider it the single greatest Twilight Zone episode. The famous pig faces.
Right.
The woman getting
Yes,
clapped.
yes. That is phenomenal.
Even though it's got some flaws, the audaciousness, the audacity to think you could pull off not showing the doctors and nurses for a whole half hour and surprise us at the end with the fact that she's beautiful. She's Donna Douglas from the Beverly Hillbillies.
Yes, exactly.
And then you see the doctors and nurses, those pig faces. In my book, I describe them as riding that line between comedy and horror. That's very hard to ride. When you look at them, at first they look ridiculous with the pug noses and the upper lip curl, but then they're also horrible at the same time.
Right.
Now, to be able to get a horrible, ridiculous reaction at the same time is a stroke of genius.
Right.
Because show me any other fantasy science fiction that's able to ride that line between comedy and horror.
Yeah.
Twilight Zone did that on a number of occasions, and those masks and that's the makeup artist William Tuttle.
Fabulous.
Behind all those great masks of the Twilight Zone. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it is. I can't wait to jump back into it a little after talking to you and getting dipped in.
I think I sent you a PDF of my Twilight Zone proposal, didn't I?
I believe so. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
That's got some sample. Yeah, I'll give you a sneak preview of the text if you're interested in reading.
No,
but like I said, if you just scroll through my Facebook page, you'll get them all in the order that they're being rerun, which is
I love those. Yeah,
Yeah.
I do look at those all the time. The To Serve Man one was the one I just read. I think the last one I read.
I mean, I guarantee you, even though there have been other books that have tried to synopsize, so to speak, these episodes, a bunch of books do that. Mine are more essays. They weave in comparisons and allusions to things in the real world. I bring in other artistic influences. I don't just give A to Z rundown of the episode. It's not like reading a resume of the episode, so to speak. I try to literally come up with an angle on each episode and write about that as the episode suggests. I'm letting the episodes suggest the way that I write about it. I know that sounds like a conundrum, but I think in the end, you judge me. But like, take To Serve Man. I guarantee you, my synopsis of To Serve Man, my essay about it, is gonna make you look at that episode in ways you haven't, no matter how well you know it, because I bring up allusions to Vietnam that right now you might go, what? Huh? What?
I believe that. That's wild.
You know what I mean? If you read the one on Facebook, it's in there.
Yeah.
But, Serling based To Serve Man on a short story by Damon Knight from 1950.
Wow.
Knight is writing at a time when America was heady from World War II. We were going to, Pax Americana. We were going to police the world, and that's what got us into Korea.
Yeah.
And that's what Damon Knight wrote To Serve Man. But Serling is writing in the early 60s. 10 years later, he's adapting it.
Right.
And it turns out we became the Canaanites to Vietnam.
Right.
Came in, we devoured their land and their people. We devoured our own land and people.
Sure did.
And yet we came into Vietnam just like the Canaanites as the benevolent benefactors. Oh, we're going to bring democracy just like in Iraq 30 years later. Oh, we're going to be greeted as liberators. Right? So those are the comparisons and historical allusions, ALL allusion, that I bring into these discussions. But I do that with everything. I do that with Bruce. I do that with comic book history. I show And that's my RISD graphic design background. So in my book on comic book history, I compare Steve Ditko's Doctor Strange to the psychedelic posters that were influenced by Ditko's psychedelic look that was pre-psychedelic.
Well, there's so many things you've done over the years, the writing, designing, the lecturing, the things. Is there one or two things that just stand out as moments that you had over doing all these different kinds of things that you grew so well to do in kind of a very busy form, kind of churning along? What were a couple that you just really remember well among them all?
Like I said, getting to work for my childhood idol, in
for Neil,
the comic book arena. In each of my arenas, I got to meet Bruce in 1978 when I was 20.
Very nice.
A theater show, because I did the marquee illustration outside that he signed. And I said to him, Bruce, your music means more to me than anything else in the world.
And there it is.
He gave me a brotherly hug.
I just put the Capitol Theater behind you. I didn't know that. I didn't know you met him.
One of my multimedia shows posted on my website and my YouTube channel. On my website, there's a Bruce Springsteen page that has
that.
Yes. I did a multimedia recreation of the September 19th show. I was in the 6th row, and John Scher, God bless him, was prescient enough to videotape the entire show. I've been saying this for 45 years, that it's the single greatest show of Bruce Springsteen, the E Street Band.
I agree with you. As a 50-year fan, that show to me just is quintessential of him as his growth.
Why? Why is it?
Because first of all, he was turning a corner after this nightmarish time after Born to Run with Mike Appel. He was worried, and we all know it from Born to Run, the book, and everything. He was really concerned. So Darkness was a huge turn, and I didn't see that tour, and I'm really bummed. But he reproved himself, and there was something about the sound and the feel of him at that show that you're talking about that was quintessential.
What is that sound and feel? Because that's what I attempt to communicate in my multimedia presentation, Steve. Yeah. What is it about the sound of that show? What is it?
Working real hard to get my hands clean. We'll drive that dusty road for my road edge to buy you a gold, wearing a pretty dress of blue. If you just want a kiss, we'll get this sex for you. I kiss the seal, why think tonight? I kiss to prove it all night, prove it all night. Girl, there's nothing else that we can do. Said prove it all night, prove it all night. And I prove it all night for you.
Well, there was a theatrical feel that Bruce has always brought to us. He's got a feel of drama as well as rock and roll and everything that we love about the musical part of it. There was just those moments where he really had you in here and in his heart and soul in a dark environment. So the video of it there wasn't a huge colorful lighting everywhere and all that crap. It was just him in the dark, and then you'd see Steven, you'd see Clarence, you'd see Roy, you'd see all the guys. But there was that sound, and that got to me. For all, as you well know, there's so many opportunities to see what he has done live, especially on this last tour, where every 5 minutes there are flips and all that shit. But that show, I can't believe that you were part of that. That part of Bruce, because that is wonderful. This place.
The image on the page 1 of the program book was bootlegged as a poster for years, and the marquee. And so I became associated with that show amongst whatever you would consider Bruce fandom online. I've been mentioned. They call it Arlen show because, I'm going to quote an old pop culture source, the movie Fahrenheit 451.
Right.
If you've ever read the book. At the very end, they burned all the books, but the book people, they train each person to memorize an entire book so that they become living books.
Right.
I was in the 6th row of that show.
Oh.
I did the artwork for the program book. I did the artwork for the marquee outside.
Wow.
At the end of the show, I got to say to Bruce what everybody wants to say to Bruce, but doesn't get the chance. And Bruce gave me the Zen perfect reaction by hugging me like a brother.
Oh.
That show, Jimmy Iovine was mixing it. Bruce, it was his biggest audience at the time, not the audience at the theater. It was only 3,500 people. It was being radio broadcast up and down the East Coast from Maine to Florida. And this was, again, the summer of 78. He had already conquered the country with the Darkness tour. John Scherer, the owner of the Capitol Theater, the promoter, wanted to have a special homecoming. 3 nights of the Capitol. He had never performed as the E Street Band in northern New Jersey.
That isn't, yes, you're right.
I grew up in Fairlawn, which is 2 towns over from Passaic.
Yes.
Bruce performed there for the first time with the E Street Band. And knowing that this was his biggest audience, and there were skeptics in the New York media that still thought he was a one-hit wonder from Born to Run 3 years earlier.
Right.
Bruce knew when you were making a live radio broadcast that it was a de facto live album.
Yeah.
All of Bruce's other radio broadcasts are his live albums years before he put out that box set, which was a big misfire, but that's a whole nother story.
Right.
But the radio broadcasts from 74, there's a great one, from 88 in Stockholm, from 75 in the Main Point in Bryn Mawr is definitive. Bruce always knew, and the band knew, that they were making a live album.
Mm-hmm.
So when you combine all those elements, his biggest audience listening in,
right?
If you watch the video of him performing as he's singing, his eyes are closed. He's singing with all that passion and intensity, knowing it's going out there for posterity, and knowing that this is when he has to prove himself.
Right.
Everybody listening, but especially the skeptics, who were plentiful. And that's why I believe him and the band, and I've heard, Steve, every live 1978 show in whatever form, soundboard quality, this, that, the Winterland show, Fox Theater, Agora in Cleveland.
Yeah,
I've heard them all.
Me too.
There is nothing like the Capitol Theater. And the fact that the whole thing exists on grainy, black and white, degenerated video. I don't know if John Scherer still owns, if there's a pristine version of that, but it doesn't matter. I've seen also every film and video of Bruce Springsteen's. There is nothing like that Capitol Theater show, even though it's grainy and degenerated. There's a rawness, a realness to it.
Yes.
That, again, if the aliens come right here and they say, Arlen, we have room in our spaceship. We've heard about this Bruce Springsteen guy. We have room in our spaceship for one Bruce Springsteen item. What are you going to give him? Are you going to give him the live box set? Are you going to give him tracks? Are you going to give him Born USA? Are you going to give him Born to Run? I'm giving them the Capitol Theater video.
Yes, I agree.
Because God bless John Scherer. You know, they talk about Dylan's 1966 Royal Albert Hall as being the single greatest live show. That used to be the reputation of it. I don't know if you knew that, Steve.
Yeah.
And a snippet of film exists of that. So dark you can barely see anything. A snippet. Aren't we fortunate that John Scherer in 1978, when there were only big white square screens in your picture there, had the foresight, the prescience to document what ended up being Bruce's single greatest show. And if Bruce is the greatest rock and roller, then I'm submitting this document, which I did a multimedia recreation, that the video of which is posted on my YouTube channel and on my Bruce Springsteen page on my website. I attempted to recreate that show in a live lecture presentation format, but it would not have been possible without John Scherer documenting.
I'm trying to think of the first time I ever heard it was when I heard it by cassette. And then I saw it, and I was just, to be able to blend it together was incredible. Look, the passion that you show in all this is pretty spectacular. What is a thing that Arlen Schumer wants to do over the next few years that you haven't done yet?
Oh, wow. God, how much time you got left? I got a lot of mountains I want to climb.
Few minutes.
There's other books I want to get published. One on the Max Fleischer Superman cartoons, which were just released on Blu-ray DVD. There's never been a coffee table art book about him.
Right.
I got my MFA a couple of years ago. My thesis was creating a couple of coffee table art books.
Yes.
And with the hopes that if I can't get it published, at least I'll get my MFA. I'd love to teach pop culture somewhere, but I haven't been able to kind of find a gig. But that's something I hope to do, whether live or virtual. And I've got a book about the great DC Comics letterer Irish Schnapp, who did every DC logo you could think of. He did the DC Bullet. He did the Comics Code stamp. And I've done a whole coffee table monograph about him.
Oh,
Gary Groth of Fantagraphics, great publisher, he's considering it because he's got a new imprint called Fantagraphics Underground that deals with more boutique-y, low press run books.
right.
And my snapbook would fit in perfectly. So I'm keeping my fingers crossed that Gary does. Come on, Gary, if you're listening, let's publish that snapbook. But the idea that I'm getting 2 books out next year about 2 of my favorite subjects, Twilight Zone and Bruce, maybe Irish Schnapp. So yeah, I'd like to keep doing webinars. I'd like to do more live lectures, and more illustration. I mean, we haven't even barely talked about my illustration work, but you know, I do comic book style art for advertising and editorial usage. I would love to eventually get a regular illustration gig doing portraits of famous people in a kind of a comic book look that I've sort of adopted as my own. And this
Right.
so all this stuff is on my website, arlenschumer.com.
Sure.
My whole life is up there, believe me.
Yeah, it is. And I think we did, we hit a great swath of what you have undertaken over the time. And it is just, it's an incredible thing to witness, man. And some of my favorite things. Did you get a chance to see?
I've got a pro marijuana superhero, Dr. Cannabis.
Oh, classic.
Marijuana enlightenment. I'm trying to market him.
Yeah.
This is his origin. Yeah, Steve, I told you we'd only be scratching. Did we not just do the tip of my iceberg? Come on.
Oh, yeah. Well, I think that's a pretty huge tip of an iceberg.
The hits just keep on coming.
Well, I love every minute of it, and people are going to get a chance to see a whole swath of what you've done and what you are going to continue to do.
Thanks,
But thanks. Let's keep in close touch on a lot of this.
Absolutely.
And I want to show you my version of Jungleland.
Where are you going to be performing that?
It's performing it right here with the local band that's getting
here?
together right in the Burke, Virginia, right in a pipe
That's
stem.
where you are.
And actually playing 2 shows 2 days prior. It's a wild ride for me right now singing. But boy, what a fabulous ride you've taken, Arlen. And I love following you, and I'm going to continue to do it. And
Thanks,
especially now that I see so many other things that I can look at about Twilight Zone and things like that.
Absolutely.
But let's keep in close touch, and I loved having you, man.
Steve, thanks for having me.
Thank you.